Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are diving deep into one of the most dramatic and strategically devastating moments of the war. So far a moment many analysts are already calling a masterstroke by Ukraine. The focus of our story is Kupiansk, a city that has suddenly transformed from a contested frontline town into a deadly trap for Russian forces. What began as a slow, calculated Ukrainian maneuver has now evolved into a nightmare scenario for Moscow's troops. Surrounded, cut off, and facing near certain destruction, this is not just another battle. This is a lesson in modern warfare, deception, patience, and precision. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why what's happening in Kupiansk could change the entire balance of power in northeastern Ukraine. For months, Kupiansk has been one of the most strategically important logistics hubs in the war. Sitting at the crossroads of key rail and road networks, the city has served as a lifeline for Russian forces operating across the Eastern Front, particularly in the Luhansk and northern Donetsk regions. Ammunition, fuel, reinforcements, everything flowed through Kupiansk. Whoever controlled it controlled the arteries of war in this sector. Russia knew this. Ukraine knew this, and that's exactly why Ukraine didn't rush. Instead of launching a loud, dramatic assault, Ukrainian commanders played a longer, smarter game. They allowed Russian forces to dig in, to become comfortable, even overconfident. Moscow poured men and equipment into the area, believing Kupiansk could be held at all costs. Trenches were dug, defensive lines were built, command posts were established, but what Russian commanders failed to see was that Kupiansk was slowly becoming a cage. Ukraine began by targeting the edges, not the city itself, but the routes leading into it. Bridges were hit with precision strikes, rail lines were sabotaged, supply convoys were ambushed miles away from the front. At first, these attacks seemed isolated, almost random. Russian command dismissed them as harassment. That was the first mistake, because every strike was part of a larger pattern, a tightening noose. Ukrainian artillery and drone units focused relentlessly on logistics. Fuel depots went up in flames. Ammunition stockpiles exploded in the night. Russian soldiers inside Kupiansk began reporting shortages, first fuel, then food, then medical supplies. Still, Moscow ordered them to hold. As weeks passed, Ukrainian infantry units advanced quietly through forests and villages surrounding the city. They avoided large-scale engagements, choosing instead to eliminate observation posts, cut communication lines, and isolate Russian units one by one. Russian soldiers found themselves unable to coordinate. Radios went silent. Orders stopped coming. By the time Russian commanders realized what was happening, it was already too late. Kupiansk was no longer a fortress. It was a pocket. Let's be clear about what surrounded really means in modern warfare. It doesn't always mean tanks encircling a city in a perfect ring. It means something far more dangerous: control of movement, fire, and information. Ukraine achieved all three. Any attempt by Russian forces to break out of Kupiansk was met with devastating artillery fire. Drone surveillance tracked every movement, day and night. Roads that once seemed safe suddenly turned into kill zones. Columns trying to escape were shredded before they could even reach open ground. Inside the city, morale collapsed. Reports from intercepted communications describe Russian soldiers begging for evacuation, pleading for air support, and arguing with commanders who could offer nothing but empty promises. Some units were told reinforcements were coming, reinforcements that never arrived. Others were ordered to counterattack with no armor, no air cover, and barely enough ammunition. It was suicide. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces maintained discipline. There was no reckless charge into the city. Instead, they applied pressure steadily, methodically, allowing hunger, fear, and exhaustion to do half the work. This is where Ukraine's strategy truly shines. Rather than sacrificing lives in brutal urban combat, they let time become their most powerful weapon. Every day trapped inside, Kupiansk weakened the Russians further. Wounded soldiers piled up with no medical evacuation. Vehicles sat abandoned, out of fuel. Command structures disintegrated. Some Russian units reportedly attempted to surrender only to be cut off from Ukrainian lines by their own commanders, who threatened them with execution if they laid down arms. Kupiansk had become a death sentence. The psychological impact of this situation cannot be overstated. For Russian troops across the front, Kupiansk is being watched closely. Soldiers in other sectors are seeing what happens when Ukrainian forces choose not to attack head-on, but instead surround, isolate, and destroy. Fear spreads faster than any missile. This is how armies collapse not all at once, but pocket by pocket. Strategically, the fall of Russian control in Kupiansk would be catastrophic for Moscow. First, it would sever one of the last reliable supply routes into northeastern Ukraine. Russian positions in Luhansk would become far more vulnerable. Second, it would free up Ukrainian forces to pivot south or east, opening new fronts and stretching Russian defenses even thinner. And perhaps most importantly, it would shatter the myth that Russia can hold territory indefinitely through sheer numbers. Kupiansk proves the opposite. Numbers don't matter when you're trapped, hungry, and surrounded. There's also a symbolic element here. Kupiansk was once hailed by Russian propaganda as a secured stronghold. State media boasted about its defenses, claiming Ukrainian advances had been stopped cold. Now, those same channels are eerily quiet. Silence often speaks louder than words. As the situation continues to deteriorate, analysts are debating what options Russia has left. The truth is grim. A breakout attempt would require massive air support Russia no longer has reliably in this region. A relief offensive would demand reserves that are already stretched thin across multiple fronts. Withdrawal is nearly impossible without suffering catastrophic losses. That leaves one option: collapse. Ukraine's operation around Kupiansk will likely be studied in military academies for years to come. It demonstrates the power of intelligence, patience, and precision in modern warfare. It shows how an army with fewer resources can defeat a larger force by attacking its weaknesses instead of its strengths. Most of all, it shows that this war is no longer about who has more tanks or more men, it's about who thinks smarter. And right now, in Kupiansk, Ukraine is thinking several moves ahead. As this battle reaches its final stages, one thing is clear. Russian forces trapped in Kupiansk are not facing a heroic last stand. They are facing the consequences of poor strategy, broken logistics, and a Ukrainian military that has mastered the art of turning enemy positions into graves. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not just a victory in the making. This is a warning. To every Russian unit still occupying Ukrainian land, Kupiansk is what happens when you underestimate your enemy. And history shows, once a trap like this snaps shut, very few escape alive. Stay with us for more in-depth analysis as events continue to unfold.